Alright guys, good morning students. Welcome to today's class. This will be the 6th class for the semester. We've had 5 classes. This will be the 6th class and we've discussed a lot. And I don't believe you've watched the videos for the previous 5 classes, because it's very important that you get accustomed to those videos. You watch them. If you can watch them again, so that you'll be able to get those concepts and what we are really discussing. Because I told you earlier on, I said philosophy is sequential in such a way that missing out on a part might affect your understanding in other areas. So today we'll be discussing the nature and scope of logic, and is one very topic that we might need to write some things on the board. But then because of the situation we find ourselves, I'll try as much as possible to program them in such a way that if you could view them, or I'll point them out to you, so perhaps when you get your textbook you could easily understand and be able to comprehend them one way or the other. So the nature and scope of logic, like we said in the introductory classes, the first 2 classes, we discussed what is logic, and we're able to say that logic is what we call the science of what? The science of reasoning. The science of reasoning. And why we do not define logic as the laws of thought or the science of thought is because it will not really differentiate what logic means to what psychology is. You know, psychology also deals with thought, human behavior, human action, mode of reasoning now. So, but logic is not just the law of thought. It is what? The study of the laws of reasoning. You know, in reasoning, when you reason things out, you try to draw inferences. And when we say inferences, by that we mean connections. We mean connection. Try to draw a link to another link to bring out a proposition or a statement that looks more coherent, looks more valid, and looks more explainable. So that is why we say logic is the study of the laws of thought. Then is the study of the law of reasoning. I mean, laws of thought deals more with psychology. The study of the laws of reasoning. So in logic we have 3 basic laws of thought. In logic we have what? 3 basic laws of thought. The first law is the law of identity. The law of identity. The law of identity say A is A. And what do we mean by A is A? Is that I can't be in Ibadan now. Like, let me put it this way. For instance, you are seeing me right here as I'm talking to you from the city of Ibadan. This is my identity. It is impossible for me to replicate that identity in another way by the law of logic. It is impossible for me what? To replicate that identity. So it is impossible at this time I'm teaching you to also be in Osogbo taking another class. My identity is one. I can't have a duplicate identity. So it is what? One of the laws of thought. It's called the law of identity. And the second law of thought is called the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction. And the law of non-contradiction definitely says that a proposition or a statement cannot be true and false at the same time. A proposition or a statement cannot be true and false at the same time. It will lead to what we call contradiction. So all politicians are liars cannot be true, and at the same time it will be false. Are you getting my point? So is it that all politicians are liars or all politicians are not liars? We call it what? The law of what? Non-contradiction. And we have the third one, we call it the principle of excluded middle. The principle of excluded middle. It has said that every statement is either true or false. Every statement is either true or false. Are you getting it? I know it might sound convincing. It looks more like the law of non-contradiction, but they are quite different. While in the law of non-contradiction we use and, the conjunction sign, the and. In the law of excluded middle we use the or, the verb sign. So every statement can either be true or false. But in the law of non-contradiction, a proposition cannot be true and at the same time that same proposition should be false. It cannot be true and at the same time false. So those are the three laws of thought. You have to note that very well. The three laws of thought. So we have what we call the type of logic. The type of logic is getting blurry. Let me try and illuminate a bit. Alright, I think it's clearer now. So I told you about the three laws of thought: the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of what? Excluded middle. So we have two types of logic. We have formal logic and what? Informal logic. Formal logic and informal logic. You know what we mean by, we'll treat informal logic first before we go very quickly to formal logic. You know, logic is, when you say logic, we call it the laws of reasoning, whereby assertion A, we have a link with assertion B to be able to draw your conclusion. So for instance, we have all politicians are liars. Obasanjo is a politician, therefore Obasanjo is a liar. The first two are what we call premises. They are grounds for your conclusion, which says that Obasanjo is a liar. You are trying to justify the fact that Obasanjo is a liar. So you started with the premise that all politicians are liars. Obasanjo is a politician, therefore Obasanjo is a liar. Now, you know, these are just normal words. These are normal words that you say. They are normal arguments you use on a daily basis. You know, you can argue between who is better between Ronaldo and Messi, who is the best coach between Jose Mourinho and Zidane. You can always argue who is more beautiful between the beauty queen of Delta State and the beauty queen of Oyo State. You can always have that argument. You can always, so, but why we call it and draw out logical inferences from it. You know, you can put in those arguments and they are logical. But why we call them informal logic is because they are not being represented using the logical signs and symbols. You know, we use what we call the normal language for it. Our normal everyday language, we use our normal day-to-day language. But when we get to the level of formal logic, we start using representative language. You know, that is what we call private language. Every discipline has his or her own private language. You know, in mathematics now, you have some language you use that myself in philosophy, once you start writing in those language, only someone in mathematics will be able to understand that particular language. Myself in philosophy will not be able to get or understand the meaning of that language. The same thing we have in English and we have in so many other disciplines. We have what we call language specified for particular discipline. So when we are talking about informal logic, it doesn't mean that those statements or propositions are not logical. It just means that you are using the normal day-to-day language. But at the level of formal logic, you start using private language or private signs and symbol that has their domain within the logic, within the logical palace. They have their domain within the logical palace. That's when you start using signs and symbol. For instance, when we get to the formal logic, everything I said about all politicians are liars, Obasanjo is a politician, therefore Obasanjo is a liar, I will be able to translate them into a formal logic, and you look as if it is a very complex task, and you might not be able to decode it. Are you getting it? So at the level of formal logic, you start to decode the meaning. But at informal logic is what we do. Even a layman, a pepper seller, someone that sells fish can apply logic at any point in time and generate any argument, and it will be logical. So that is what we use it on a day-to-day basis, the informal logic. Now, before we go strictly to what we call formal logic, we need to lay an antecedent for it, and the antecedent happens to be what? Argument. It happens to be argument. So what is argument? We need to understand that argument in philosophy is quite different from the way people conceive arguments to be. What do I mean by this? That argument in philosophy, or our conception of what argument is quite different from the general interpretation of argument, in the sense that argument is not a disagreement. It is not a disagreement. It's not as if you are trying to say that there is a war or there is a conflict and so we are arguing. Argument is simply buttressing a conclusion by set of premises. Buttressing a conclusion by what? Set of premises. Those premises are your justifications for what? The conclusion. The premises are your justifications for the conclusion. So it's not as if it's a disagreement. And something about argument is you can have a wrong argument. Are you getting it? You can have, what I mean by a wrong argument is you can have a false argument and at the same time it will be valid. It will be valid. So that's why you see in some cases, I think students of law will be able to understand this better and they will understand what I'm trying to say better. Students in the faculty of law. Now, what do I mean? You see some cases that they take some cases to the court of law. You know that person has done what is wrong. You know that person should be found guilty. But because of the way the lawyer or the attorney has been able to marshal the argument, it is with the placement of the argument is so logical in such a way that the judge has no other option than to validate the argument. So that an argument is validated does not mean that that argument is true in all cases. Are you getting my point? That is validated, it doesn't mean what? That it is true in all cases. You can tell lie from the beginning to the end and it will still be valid once it has logical coherence. That is why you see when they take people to court of law, you know that this person has killed someone, but because he is able to justify it using logical sequence, and he was able to inform them that at this also point time when you said I killed someone, I was with Mr. A and he calls Mr. A as a witness, and Mr. A said at this also point this social person was with me. Because of that, we cannot justify the fact that he killed that person at that particular point in time, and so the person is discharged and acquitted. And in the real sense of it, the person actually killed, but it was just a manipulation. So in the court of law, they don't really deal with the truthfulness of an argument, they deal with the validity of an argument. It might be true and not valid, so you might be justified. You might say what is right, but you might not be able to marshal your point to become valid, and people will think that what you are wrong or you are the losing end. I don't know if you are getting my point. So argument is not like a disagreement to us. It is giving set of premises to support what? Your conclusion. So from here we said an argument is made up of statement or proposition that can be divided into two main components. At least one of the statements is in an argument will constitute the premise, which is at least another statement, with at least another statement constituting the conclusion. Every argument must have a premise and a conclusion. Every argument must have a premise and a conclusion. It's quite different from how you argue that Messi is better than Ronaldo. That is your conclusion. You don't even have any premise for it. Nigeria is better than UK. You don't even have any premise for it. That is just your conclusion. That is not an argument. In an argument, you give what we call the premises and the conclusion. So now, example of argument. All men are mortal. That is premise 1. Aristotle is a man. That is premise 2. Therefore, Aristotle is a mortal. That is the conclusion. All men are mortal. Premise 1. Aristotle is a man. Premise 2. Therefore, Aristotle is a mortal. All politicians are liars. Premise 1. Obasanjo is a politician. Premise 2. Therefore, Obasanjo is a liar. That is conclusion. That is what? An argument. I hope you are able to get that point. And you must be able to understand the fact that the conclusion of an argument does not necessarily have to be at the end. Are you getting my point? The conclusion of an argument does not necessarily have to be at the end. Now, look at this particular argument. Your conclusion might come first. So in your exam, they can give you a set of arguments and ask you to identify which one is the conclusion. So that's why we still go into what we call the premise identifier and the conclusion identifier. There are things that you know that this is a premise and this is what? A conclusion. So let me give you an example of this. All politicians are liars. Adebayo is a politician and he lies a lot. Isiaka is a politician and a known liar. Jonathan is a politician and a known liar. At this point, if you want to look at this, you discover that the conclusion is the first statement I said, which is all politicians are liars. In this argument, we have 3 premises and 1 conclusion. Now look at the premise. The first premise says Adebayo is a politician and he lies a lot. Isiaka is a politician and a known liar. Jonathan is a politician and a liar. That is, you are giving particular instances to now a situation where you generalize. Therefore, all politicians are liars, because I've been able to give you 3 particular instances of politicians who are liars. Therefore, all politicians are liars. So the conclusion is the first statement. Are you getting it? So you can also have the conclusion in the middle. You can have the conclusion in the middle. Look at this argument again. We have government has decided to remove oil subsidy by 2012. Government has decided to remove oil subsidy by 2012. Therefore, the masses are raising up for a protest against subsidy. That is the second statement. People generally believe that this would further escalate the economic hardship in the country. Now, in this statement, the conclusion is in the middle. Why? Because the first premise is government has decided to remove oil subsidy by 2012. That is premise 1. The last statement is people generally believe that this would further escalate the economic hardship in the country. That is premise 2. The conclusion now says, therefore, the masses are raising up for a mass protest against the removal of subsidy. That is what? The conclusion. I hope we are able to get that now. Now, to premise indicator. How do we know premise indicator? Premise indicator are terms, words or phrase that point or precedes the premise or premises. They point or precede the premise or premises. So, example of premise indicator include since, because, for, as, following, in view of, as shown, inasmuch, otherwise. Those are examples of what? Premise indicator. But conclusion indicator, we have therefore, hence, thus. If you look at them, they look like they are forming what? A conclusion. Therefore, you are drawing a thing, you are drawing a curtain. Hence, after some words, then thus. Do we get that? Now, we have type of argument. We have 2 types of what? Argument. We have what we call the inductive argument and the deductive argument. The inductive argument and the deductive argument. Now, the inductive argument is a form of argument that will move from particular instances to universal conclusion. We move from particular to general. If you are in the sciences, you will be able to understand that in sciences, they deal majorly with induction, inductive argument. In the sciences, they deal majorly with what? Inductive argument. You move from particular instances to general instances. For instance, it rained heavily in 2016 April. It rained heavily in 2017 April. It rained heavily in 2018, 2019, 2020 April. Therefore, it will rain heavily in 2021 April. We are moving from particular instances to what? To general instances. It is induction. An inductive argument is based on probability, because it might not be the case in 2021 April that it will rain heavily. Are you getting my point? Inductive argument is basically on probability, and that is why inductive argument does not have the characteristics of valid or invalid. It does not have the characteristics of valid or invalid. So inductive argument is probabilistic in nature. So for instance, you are asked to check the color of the goats in a building. So we have 100 goats inside the building. The first one came out as a black goat. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth came out, and we have black goats. The fifth, and say, the first goat that came out is black, the second is black, the third, the fourth, and the fifth is black. Therefore, every goat inside that building is a black goat. It is induction. What if the number 99 goat is white? So in inductive argument, you have not examined all variables. You have not examined all variables. You are only judging on the few variables you have at hand to draw a conclusion. And the strength of inductive argument is based on more evidences, more premises to justify it. That is the strength. It is what? Probability. Are you getting my point now? Now, the second type of argument is deductive argument. Deductive argument happens to be the opposite of inductive argument. Deductive argument, you move from general instances to particular instances. You know, in induction, you move from particular to general, but in deduction, you move from general to what? To particular. That means you've been able to examine your all variables, and you are now bringing it down to particular what? Instances. Are you getting my point? And that is the example I gave earlier. All politicians are liars. Obasanjo is a politician, therefore Obasanjo is a liar. I've moved from general instance now to what? A particular instance. That is what? Deductive argument. Deductive argument. And it is only a deductive argument that can either be valid or invalid, or sound and unsound. It is only a deductive argument that we can say the argument is valid or invalid, the argument is sound or not sound. Now, what are the difference between deductive and inductive argument? Deductive argument, if all the premises are true, the conclusion must necessarily be true. In deductive argument, if all the premises are true, the conclusion must necessarily be true. While inductive argument, if all the premises are true, the conclusion might not necessarily be true. Remember the example I gave you about goats. So all the premises could be true. You could say up to the 10th goat I checked inside that house, they are black. But what if the number 99 goat is white? So that all the premises are true does not necessarily mean that the conclusion will be true. That it has been raining heavily in April of every year since 2016 to 2020 does not justify that it will rain heavily in 2021 April. Are you getting my point? Then, in deductive argument, all the information or factual content of the conclusion is already contained, at least in the premise. All the information, you've examined all variables. Already. So all the information of the conclusion are also inside what? The premises. They are contained in it. But in inductive argument, the conclusion usually goes beyond the premise. The conclusion could give you additional information about the premise. So in science, majorly they use what we call inductive argument. Inductive argument. And like I said earlier, we always say that the truthfulness of an argument can apply to both induction and deduction. They are preposition. A preposition can either be true or can be false. So it applies to both. But validity applies to only what? Deductive argument. Validity applies to what? Only what? Deductive argument. Now, a valid argument is that in which it is impossible to accept the premise and deny the conclusion without self-contradiction. So, when you say an argument is valid, it means that the premises are true and the conclusion is also true. But if the premise is true and the conclusion is false, then it is invalid. It leads to what? Self-contradiction. For instance, we say all politicians are liars. Obasanjo is a politician. Therefore, Obasanjo is not a liar. You know, it leads to self-contradiction. It is not valid. So, for it to be valid, the premises must be true and the conclusion must be true. Or the premises must all be false and the conclusion will also what? Be false. We can have T and the conclusion T, and we can have F. F means false. As I said, sometimes we might need to write, but we just have to make do with what we have. Now, we can have F, and the conclusion will also what? Be false. Now, soundness of an argument. Now, note, soundness of an argument. An argument is sound if it is valid and has true premises and true conclusion. An argument is sound if it is valid, it has true premises and true conclusion. An invalid argument can never be sound. Are you getting my point? An invalid argument can never be sound. But a valid argument can either be sound or unsound. And what do we mean? We mean that if all the premises are true and the conclusion is true, then we can say this is a very what? Sound argument. In the court of law, we can have a valid argument and at the same time, it might not be sound in the court of law. So let's say we have the case of Mr. Ade and Mrs. Shehu. We have a case of murder between both of them. At the point where the attorney of Mr. Ade was marshalling his argument, he made some errors. That means those statements were not true. But one way or the other, he did that just to be able to justify the case of his client. So some premises were false, but the conclusion is still true and some premises true. Mr. Ade can still win the case. He will still win the case because the argument is valid, but just that it is not sound. Once we have case of falsehood within an argument, it makes the argument not to be what? To be sound. Once you have case of falsehood in any of the premises, it makes it what? Not to be sound. So I believe we've understood what arguments are now. Then let's quickly go to formal logic. I'm not sure for this semester we'll be treating rules of inferences. So you might not need that. The rules of inferences in your textbook, I'm not sure we will be going through that. But then I'll be doing what we call the formal logic. Now, what is formal logic? Formal logic is an aspect of logic that deals primarily with logical or formal structure of a statement. It deals primarily with the logical or formal structure of a statement and argument. It focuses on deductive or formal connection between arguments. It focuses on what? Deductive or formal connection between arguments. Now, at this point, let me see if I could write some things down and show you on the screen. So, like I said, in formal logic, we have what we call representative symbol. We transfer all the arguments in informal logic to formal logic. So in formal logic, we have signs and symbols. We call them logical connectives. Logical what? Connectives. And we have 5 major logical connectives. 5 major logical connectives. We have the and. The and is the conjunction sign. We have the or, which is the disjunction sign. We have the tilde sign, which is what? The negation sign. We have the conditional sign. We have the conditional sign, that is if then, the conditional sign, and we have what we call the biconditional. We have the conditional sign and we have what we call the biconditional. So we have what we call the and. A and D. The and sign, we use a dot to represent it. I'm not sure if you can get it clearly on my screen. Can you see that dot? That is and. The and sign, that is and. We call it what? The conditional. The conditional sign is a logical connective. So we use it to connect two prepositions together. We use it to connect what? Two prepositions together. For instance, Ade is going to the market and it will also branch at the mall. Ade is going to the market and it will also branch at the mall. That is the dot sign. It's called what? The what did I just call it now? The conjunction sign. The and sign. The conjunction sign. Then the second logical connectivity is the or sign. With or either or, we use the verse sign, the verse symbol to represent it. We call it the verse symbol. It's the V shape. Can you see it on your screen? The V shape. Aha, that's it. That is the V shape. That is the or sign. We call it the disjunction sign. We call it disjunction sign. We use it to connect two prepositions also. Either Ade is a lawyer or a farmer. Either Ade is a lawyer or a farmer. That is what? The disjunctive sign. Then we have what we call the negation sign. Negation sign is used as the tilde sign. Can you see it on your screen? That's the third sign. The tilde sign. The tilde sign. That is what? The negation sign. It is what? It is, we call it negation in the sense that it is the opposite of what you are saying. Ade is not a bachelor. We use the tilde sign to represent it. You know, I told you at formal logic we start using signs and symbols now. We start getting to that level very quickly. So you have to pay attention to it. Because if there is something I know will come out in your exam, you will always have formal logic in your exam. And it constitutes quite a number of questions almost every year. So you have to pay quite attention to these signs, the symbol, and how they are being used. This is not mathematics, this is logic. So you have to pay quite good attention to it. So that is the negation sign. Then the other sign we have is the conditional sign. We call it the if then sign. We call it the conditional sign. The conditional sign. I think the conditional sign we use recall it again. Okay. Yeah, the horseshoe. We use the horseshoe as the sign, the conditional sign. Now look at the conditional sign. I guess you can see it clearly. That's the conditional sign. If then, the horseshoe. Can you see like a C shape in the opposite direction? The horseshoe. So we say if Shegun is a bachelor, then Shegun is an unmarried man. If Shegun is a bachelor, then Segun is an unmarried man. That is the conditional sign. Then the last one of the logical connective is what we call the if and only if. If and only if. We call it what? The biconditional. If and only if. We call it what? The biconditional sign. The biconditional sign. That is, you have an or should, then you have a dash with it, or you can use three signs, the three equal to signs. We call it the biconditional. Can you see it on your screen? That's the biconditional. We call it if and only if. So we can say Segun is an unmarried man if and Segun is a bachelor. If and only if Segun is an unmarried man. If and only if Segun is an unmarried man. Those are what we call the 5 logical connectives. The 5 logical connectives. Then we have what we call prepositional variables. Prepositional variables. Prepositional variables are letters that we use to represent arguments. Prepositional variables. They are letters we use to represent argument. They are small letters, lowercase letter. We can use lowercase letter from P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W. So we use the small letter case to imply the prepositional variables. We have the P, Q, U, V, W to explain that. Then we have what we call prepositional constants. Prepositional constants are uppercase letter. They are capital letter. We can use from A to Z. They are capital letter. We call them prepositional constant. So you still understand them when I start bringing out forms of argument. Then also part of what we call the logical connectives at times, we put what we call the universal quantifier and the existential quantifier. The universal quantifier and the existential quantifier. This is used to, the universal quantifier now is used to generalize. It is interpreted given as the capital letter X. The capital letter X like this. The capital letter X. So we use it to interpret it. So in the case where we say all, then we have essential quantifier. When we use the sum, we use what? The sum. And say some men are mortals. Some men are what? Are mortals. So now, formal logic deals with deductive argument. It deals with what? Deductive argument. You know, formal logic, we use majorly what we call and in method of deduction, like I said, the method of deduction, we can use natural language like your normal language and formal argument in artificial language. So at this point we are going to using it in artificial what? Language, using what we call artificial or symbolic logic. So let me see. So we can identify several types of argument. Types of argument in formal logic. This is expressed in natural language. We have all goats, no goats, some goats, and some goats are not. These 4 forms of categorical statement are traditionally called the AIEO statement or proposition. AIEO statement or proposition in logic. We have, when you have a statement that we have the all, it is called the A proposition. When you have no, that is the negation. No, we have the I proposition. When we have some goats are, we have the E proposition. Then when we have the some goats are not, we have what we call the O proposition. So I told you what deductive argument is. So very quickly we'll be going to types of deductive argument. Types of deductive argument. We have 3 major types of deductive argument. We have what we call categorical syllogism. Categorical syllogism. We have disjunctive syllogism and we have hypothetical syllogism. Categorical syllogism, disjunctive syllogism, and hypothetical syllogism. For categorical syllogism, they are arguments containing categorical statements that affirm or assert or deny some claim. They place argument in form of category. At that point, that's where you use the AIEO proposition majorly, because it will say all politicians are liar, or some politicians are liar. All men are mortal, some men are mortal. That is placing them in category. You place them what? In category. It's a deductive argument. It's a type of deductive argument. It's called what we call the categorical syllogism. Then we have what we call the disjunctive syllogism. Disjunctive syllogism, like the disjunction sign. I told you about the disjunction sign. It is the or sign. That the verse sign I showed you earlier on. It is the or sign. It is an either or situation. It is also a form of what? Deductive argument. For instance, you have either John is the Messiah or there is no hope for humanity. Either John is the Messiah or there is no hope for humanity. John is not the Messiah, therefore there is no hope for humanity. Either John is the Messiah or there is hope or there is no hope for humanity. John is not the Messiah, therefore there is no hope for humanity. What did we use there? We used the either, the disjunctive syllogism, the or sign, either. Then we have what we call the hypothetical syllogism. Hypothetical syllogism. These arguments or statements are compact statements containing antecedent and consequences. Antecedent and consequences. The antecedents are majorly the premises. Antecedents are majorly what? The premises. While the consequences are what? The conclusion. Antecedents are majorly premises, while the consequences are the conclusion. For example of hypothetical syllogism is, if you lie, I will not marry you again. You lie, therefore I will not marry you again. So the hypothetical syllogism used what we call the biconditional sign. The biconditional sign. The horseshoe I showed you earlier. The horseshoe I showed you here. That's the biconditional sign. Now, I already told you validity of an argument, how to know if an argument is valid or not valid. Let me check if there is any other thing we've not touched between the scheme in your scheme of work. Okay. So properties of inductive argument, I told you we have probability, and then so now let me now give you an example. How do we translate this argument to formal logic? Let me give you an example of one translation. So now we told you we have prepositional variable and prepositional constant. So let's use the prepositional variable. So we want to say all politicians are liars. Politician will stand for P. Liars will stand for what? Q. Are you getting it? Obasanjo is a politician. Obasanjo will stand for R. You remember politician is P. Are you getting it? Therefore, Obasanjo, which is R, is a liar, Q. Are you getting it? So we have P implies Q, R implies P, therefore R implies Q. So this is the valid form of, this is your comment. Can you see the argument here? The second, that's the argument. That's the argument. P implies Q, R implies P, R therefore Q. So for instance, you want to say either John is the Messiah or there is no hope for humanity. John is the Messiah as P, no hope for humanity as R. So either it will be P ver R. Can you see that one? P ver R. P ver R. Then you now want to say Ade and Segun are liar. P dot Q. Can you see that? Ade and Segun are liar. P dot Q. That is what we call the conditional statement. You now want to say, let's now put in a statement like, neither Ade nor Segun is a liar. Neither Ade nor Segun is a liar. Neither Ade nor Segun is a liar. So can you look at it this way? Look at it up. The very first. You see the tilde sign is neither P ver neither Q. Neither P ver neither Q. Neither Ade or Segun is a liar. Tilde P ver tilde Q. That is it. So, and that's which one we have. I've used the then sign. So, and that's how we put it in formal logic. So, I'm not sure we'll be going through the rules of inferences. If we'll be going through the rules of inferences, that means I will have to teach you in another class, but I can't find it in the scheme of work sent to us by the university. So we'll just stop here. I believe you've been able to know the quantifiers, the premise, the conclusion, indicators, and the rest. So till we meet again the next class, you can always ask your question on the group on 070395872005. We'll meet again next class to teach another interesting topic. And if you have any question, please do well to send your question. Most especially at this point, we deal with logic. I remain your tutor, Oluwatobi David Eson. Do have a great day. So thank you.